Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Equity in Math Classrooms. My name is Rita Sa, and I am an adjunct lecturer at Cal State Long Beach, and I also work at the Culture and Equity Project at UCLA Center X. I am so excited to sit here with Pamela and Kyndall Brown, the authors of Choosing to See, A Framework for Equity in the Math Classroom, and this is the fabulous book that we'll be talking about today. For those of you who are watching live, please feel free to post your questions on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll try to address them at the end. Dr. Pam Setta has been a math educator for over 30 years. She worked as a classroom teacher, an instructional coach, a math coordinator for several districts, and is now an educational consultant. Dr. Kyndall Brown has over 35 years of experience in math education. He was a classroom teacher, served as a mathematics resource teacher. He was the director of the UCLA Math Project and also currently serves as the executive director of the California Math Project. So I first want to share that I was gifted this book by my friend Melody, and it quickly became my favorite summer read. And to give you all some background, I will start with my math story, which you all will understand when you read this book. Growing up in my K-12 schooling, I never felt that I was good at math. Actually, even in my credential program, even as a teacher, I was told by peers, by other teachers, by even my own parents that I was not good at math. My mom still jokes around that she remembers sitting for hours at the table to try to do math homework because I couldn't even just memorize 3 times 6, even though we had just reviewed it, maybe 5 minutes before. On top of that, I also had this Asian stereotype that we were supposed to automatically be good at math. And even though I knew it was a stereotype, the failure of not being good at math weighed so heavily on me. And so because of all of those painful experiences, I became an educator who really just kind of pushed math away. It was something that I had to check off. I also said things like, oh, I'm not a math person. I'm an ELA person. I don't do math. I'm stronger. Those were my narratives. And I even got my master's in a second credential in reading language arts. So that really just solidified my narrative that I am not a math person. But after reading this book, it really was the first time in my life, and I've been in education for almost 20 years, the first time in my life that I really felt like I could teach math. It healed me, it empowered me. And so that's why I asked you both to come here, because my wish is really for everyone to be able to read this book and to maybe even heal and empower themselves so that they don't perpetuate a lot of those negative ideas towards their students and even for themselves. So now that I've shared my math story, Pam and Kyndall, would you please share your math stories with us?
You want to go first, Pam?
Well, sure. So my math story was, as long as I can remember, math was my favorite subject. I can't tell you why. It just was something that I always took an interest in. But I did have very traditional teachers, and oftentimes they taught algorithms that did not make sense. But for me, it had to make sense. So I would take whatever they taught. For example, like when you're borrowing, when you have 1,000 and you're borrowing and you have to borrow from zeros and make them 9, that made no sense to me. But I looked at it and I started studying it. And then I was like, well, that says 1,000. If you borrow 1 from 1,000, that makes 999. That makes sense to me. And so that's what I did. Those are the kinds of things that I did for myself, just because I wanted math to make sense to me and because I loved it so much. That's what I did. And so what I found out was those are the things that I passed on to my students when I became a teacher. I refused to teach math that didn't make sense. If it didn't make sense to me, I wasn't going to teach it to my students that way. And so although I was successful in high school, and then I got to college, I did struggle a bit, but never did it cross my mind that I couldn't learn it. I had enough success. My teachers had valued what I had to offer, that I just knew, even in college when it became hard, who can I talk to? who can help me? And so that was my attitude that helped me be successful in math.
And, for me, similarly, I can't ever remember a time when, particularly in the K-12 experience, that I struggled with math. It always was something I was very drawn to. I remember my ninth grade algebra teacher, Mr. Perlman, and how, again, like Pam said, so many, I've had very traditional teachers for the most part, but there was something about the way that Mr. Perlman taught, the properties of equality of algebra that just made so much sense to me. And it let me know that as long as I followed those rules, I could get the answer to I could solve that equation, right? It might take some other techniques, but those were the basic building blocks. And, Center X is part of my math journey as well. In fact, I was a teacher leader at in the UCLA Math Project when the Center for Academic Interinstitutional Programs became Center X. And from the time that I was a teacher leader in the UCLA Math Project, the focus was on equity in mathematics. And so that's always been, as long as I've been a leader in this work, a huge focus. It also, was related to the population, the places where I worked and the populations of students that I worked with. I knew that these students were capable of being successful in mathematics, but I always felt like I needed to figure out what I needed to do to help them understand the math better. And so I always felt like professional development. I always knew that there was a lot I didn't know about teaching, and professional development was a way for me to learn how to teach better. And so all that, I think, has contributed to who I am today.
Thank you so much. So one of my questions that I really I think is so important is there's such a huge misunderstanding, and I've heard it a lot, that math has nothing to do with equity, that it's not cultural. And so I was hoping if one of you or both of you can share how math is and can be inequitable, and how it also perpetuates the marginalization of so many groups.
Sure, I can start. So one of the thing is that learning, no matter what it is always cultural because it's always social. Learning takes place in a social context. What we value in a classroom, who we value, whose voices get heard, all of that is very culturally situated. And so oftentimes in math classes, we have valued the abstract over, abstract understanding over contextual understanding. And then unfortunately, because schools have valued abstract understanding, then when kids get out of school and they get in real life, which is always full of context, they don't recognize the math that they see in the real world. And then we wonder why they can't use math in their real world settings. And that's because we set up this idea that somehow learning things abstractly apart from a context somehow is valued over learning it in context. And now that we know so much more about how our brains work, we only retain things that we can make connections to. That's how our brains work. So we have been spending years and years and years teaching in ways that don't even accommodate how our brains work.
And, just to add to that, mathematics is a human endeavor. Mathematics was developed by human beings engaging in everyday life activities. Every culture has mathematical words in their language. Many cultures have, even though they may not have had written language, developed very sophisticated mathematical systems. It's very easy to go through your K-12 education or even a university education and come to the conclusion that mathematics is the product of white European males, when nothing could be further than from the truth. Algebra is an Arabic word. The numbers that we use are Arabic numbers. cultures, right? Many, many cultures. There's a wonderful book called The Crest of the Peacock, The Non-European Roots of Mathematics, that shows very clearly how cultures all over the world have developed very sophisticated, high-level mathematics, and that this knowledge has flowed across cultures, right? But that story hasn't really been told. And so it's important that people come to that understanding and know that math is a human, just like language is a human endeavor, mathematics is a human endeavor. And so part of the work that we're trying to do is to, there's been a whole movement in the mathematics education community to rehumanize mathematics. And that's, I think, part of the work that we're trying to do.
I love that. Thank you. It's so important. I wanted to just kind of jump on that. I work with a lot of educators, and we use language to explain math. And so because the language that we use to explain math and to teach it, it is always cultural. It is always situated in who we are and how we believe our students learn, in how we even ask a question and the types of responses we expect or receive. So yeah, everything is always situated in culture. It's never separated. Another thing I wanted to talk about is, one of the fascinating things that I guess it just kind of healed me was having this aha moment about my math identity and how it was so fixed. And you hear my growth mindset, right? It was fixed. It is no longer fixed. Again, I'm really trying to move away from using language like I'm not a math person, which I know still a lot of educators still use. And I still want to give some space for people to read the book and feel excited when they access a lot of this new identity work. But if you can kind of briefly touch upon, where do our beliefs about math or even any other content area, right? Because there are people who say, I don't do language arts and I'm a math person, but where do those beliefs come from?
One of my mentors and colleagues, Dr. Alan Schoenfeld at UC Berkeley, has this statement that he says there's two types of people: math people and non-math people. And non-math people are made in schools, right? It's what happens to students through this process of schooling that we come to believe that the only kind of math is the math that's in a textbook, right? We don't look at all of the different kind of problem solving and critical thinking that a person has to do just to live as mathematics, right? And so I think a lot of the work is really demystifying that aspect of it and really helping people to recognize the ways that they are engaging in mathematics. Over the last several years, we've been talking about these standards for mathematical practice, and those are the ways that all students should be engaging in mathematics. And really, there are ways that human beings engage in mathematics in their daily lives as well, making sense of problems and persevering and solving them, using appropriate tools strategically, looking for patterns and those kinds of things. Right. So it's really changing the relationship between, teaching and learning of mathematics and teachers and students, that's going to help people see and look at mathematics in a different way and help to build, that identity. One of the things that I've noticed over the course of my career, that being successful in mathematics, when a student gets a problem correct or they've solved a problem that they've been struggling with, it really does build their self-esteem. You can see their body language and their physical appearance change, the sense of pride that they have, right? So there is this huge connection between the idea of math success and identity and accomplishment. When I tell people I have a math background, they tell me their life story, right? Because there's this esteem that having math knowledge has built up in the society and the culture.
Yeah, and that reminds me of how we define what is doing math, right? Many times people think doing math is regurgitating math facts, filling out, getting answers quickly, following procedures that your teacher tells you. And so when we do workshops, I oftentimes give the definition. Doing math is noticing patterns, describing patterns, generalizing patterns. And research shows that infants notice patterns. Like our brains are hardwired to notice patterns. So much of what we do in schools is just give students math that's already been done. It's like we give the end of the story, we give the end of the book, and then we wonder why people don't want to watch the movie anymore or read the movie. But that's what we've been doing to students in school. We've been asking them to get answers to mathematics that has already been done. But what Kyndall was talking about is that boost in pride when students figure things out. When they're able to figure out and solve problems and things and persevere and things that they didn't know right off the bat, no one was telling them exactly how to do it, but they had these tools, they put them together to figure out that. I have yet to see a student that doesn't want that feeling and that satisfaction. And so I think it's really important for us to make sure that all students can see themselves as doing math and help, as I say oftentimes, math has an image problem because a lot of people aren't buying what we're selling. And so when students come to our classrooms, we're going to either reinforce those stereotypes about math or we're going to disrupt them. There is no in between.
Yeah, and we also have, the issue of confirming our own biases about ourselves, right? And so when at least for me, I remember when I hit a wall with a problem or a concept and I couldn't figure it out, it was enough for me to say, "Oh, see, I knew it. I'm just not good at it." No one gave me the extra push. No one gave me the I don't know, the right questions or the way to break down a concept in a way that I was able to understand. And we know math was taught really differently back in the 80s and 90s, but still I developed such great learned helplessness in math. It really was, yeah. And so what does an effective math classroom look like? And I know that's a loaded question, but in a dream world, what does a beautiful, effective math classroom look like?
It's funny that you asked that because I remember being asked that on an interview and I gave them the ICU CARE framework. The ICUCARE, include others as experts, understand your students well, be critically conscious, assess, activate, and build on prior knowledge, use culturally relevant curricula, release control and expect more. And of course, we go into great detail about each of those. But I think all of those things work together to really have an effective classroom. One of the things we talk about is, teachers have to, because learning takes place inside children's heads, we can't control that. Kids have to control that. So we have to let some of that go. But what can we control? We can control the environment. We can control what happens in our classrooms, but we can't release control if we don't have high expectations for our kids. We can't use culturally relevant curricula if we don't understand them. And so all of these principles kind of work together to create effective classrooms.
And, I think about what an ineffective classroom looks like. And that's where the students are sitting in rows working individually, where all of the knowledge is coming from the teacher. And this teacher is working examples and students are copying notes, right? Where there's no technology being used, where none of the mathematics is being connected to the students' lives or to any real world context. Students don't see themselves in the curriculum, right? And so then what it would look like is seeing students engaged in mathematical argumentation around really interesting problems. the teacher circulating around the classroom, giving feedback, pushing students further, students using technology to, look up information and bring that information into the problem solving space. Students connecting the mathematics to their real world. Students bringing in the situations from their real lives to be explored, right? All of those things are, to me, what
and
a
going back to
classroom
the
should.
identity work that we were talking about, when Kyndall was talking about what makes an ineffective classroom, all those things that he described impacts a person's identity oftentimes very negatively. And so I know that there are teachers who want to control, they come from a good place. They want to have their kids have good test scores. But I often wonder, if you're standing there drilling things into people's head, constantly repeating the same thing over so they don't forget and make sure they understand it, at what cost is that to our students? What cost? We may get them to pass this test to be able to retain the information long enough to pass the test. But what is that doing to our students and their identity? Even for our high achievers, so many of our higher achievers, once they get out of school, they want nothing more to do with math. And so it's important that we're able to develop our students as problem solvers, and that the goal is, what is the goal of math? Is it to get into a good school? Is it to pass those tests so you get in good school? I would say the goal of math is to help our students learn how to solve problems, because we have a lot of problems that need to be solved. And if we can teach our kids to use math as a tool to help solve problems and figure out how to solve problems, and that they can do it, that's powerful.
And I also think about it like, if, I'm going to teach you how to ride a bike, but I'm going to lecture to you about how to ride a bike. I'm going to show you video of people riding bikes. I'm going to show you lots of pictures of bikes, right? Are you going to learn how to ride a bike? No, the only way you're going to be able to ride that bike is to get on it, and you're going to have to fall down a few times. You're going to have to, I may have to put some training wheels on it until you get used to it, and then take those training wheels off. But and it's the same thing with mathematics. The only way that you're going to get good at math is if you do math, and doing math is not 20 problems on page 59. It is giving them real world problems to solve. How are we going to deal with the COVID pandemic, right? That's a real world problem that doesn't have a defined solution, that I'm going to have to think about what are all the variables involved. How do I formulate some kind of solution? How do I test to see if my solution works? And if it is good, if not, then I got to go back to the starting point, right? That's what doing math is. It's not sitting up watching somebody work problems, right?
And actually, that leads me perfectly to a question. I've noticed a lot of educators understand the importance of real life scenarios and real life math, but they also don't know where to start or how to even come up with some of the problems and that are grade level appropriate or age appropriate. So do you have some resources for educators aside from your book?
Well, yeah, there are lots of resources out there. UCubed, which is a site out of Stanford, Joe Bowler's site. Illustrative Mathematics has a lot of really good tasks. There's a brand new book by some colleagues of ours called Culturally Relevant Math Tasks. Is that the correct title, Pam? Yeah, hold it up. And there are a series of books by Corwin and NCTM that are focused on tasks to explore, respond to, I forget the exact title, but issues of social injustice. And there's a high school version, a middle school version, an upper elementary, and a lower elementary version. And those are all really good. That's just a handful of resources out there.
And I have on my website, I have a blog, my website, pamseta.com. There's a blog on there that talks about It's titled Creating Culturally Relevant Tasks, Not as Hard as You Think. And it really encourages to first start with good cognitively demanding tasks. And so a lot of those sites that Kyndall just mentioned, UCubed, achievethecore.org, Illustrative Math, Enrich, those are some good places to start. And then gradually you could take it to a stage 2 task by replacing the names with names that are meaningful. Replace it with your students' names, put school names, put names that are in your community, places that your students go, those kind of things. That's a little baby step, but that's how you can take it stage 1 to stage 2. Then you can replace the context of the math, and that takes it to a stage 3. And then once you've gotten comfortable with that, then you can move it to a stage 4 task, which is a task where students are agents of change. And so that's a progression, a continuum, because of course, ultimately the goal is to get students to a place to where they see themselves as agents of change. But that continuum gives teachers a process, a continuum of a place to start and where they can move to get there. And that's, once again, pamseta.com, and it's my blog.
Thank you so much. Your book also has so many specific scenarios and tasks. So I found it really helpful, honestly, even though I'm not teaching math. I still went through it. I'm telling you, your book was so motivational. Before we get to the questions from the audience, do you have any final takeaways for parents and educators? And I also want to include parents because I know, at least for me, my parents were a huge part of my math identity. And we know parents are the ones that can really perpetuate positive or negative beliefs about ourselves. So do you have any final takeaways for parents and educators?
Well, I always encourage parents to not spread the math phobia, to not say, even if it means lying to your children. Now, you do it every year at Christmas, right? Even if it means lying to your children, tell them, you know what, I was good at math. I really like math. Or avoid, if you got to say, don't say something negative. Play games with your children, card games, dominoes, board games. All of those types of things help build, like the dominoes and dice and things like that, help build number sense and a number fluency, but they also help build problem solving strategies and things like that. There are lots of resources within the communities, libraries, museums, cultural centers, and always looking out for where's their math. When you're cooking, how do you talk about math while you're cooking, while you're shopping? Have them estimate, what's the total bill going to be? How much do you think that's going to cost? What's the better deal if I buy, 2 for one of these or one of these, right? These are all ways, depending on what you do for a living, right? You can also bring that into, think about ways to mathematize that work as well. So those are all, things that parents can do.
Absolutely. Those are exactly things that I did with my kids. The most important thing is to help them understand math is everywhere, just like words are everywhere. Math is everywhere, and just helping them, when they're younger, one of the best ways to not pass on that math phobia is just to help them see math is normal, just like reading is normal. It's a normal, natural endeavor. And then the other thing, for those of you who are parents of older children, sometimes you think, oh my gosh, the math is too hard. I can't help them anymore. Well, you can still help them. You don't have to know the math. Matter of fact, when they get older, it's better that you not teach them the math. But what you can do is to help them is, one, you can have them explain things to you. And if it doesn't make sense to you, you're going to help them learn to articulate what they do understand. And then the other thing is, what a gift that you can give to your kids if you can figure things out together. That is a powerful tool, just to be able to encourage your students that they can figure things out. Well, because 2 heads are better than 1. Well, let's see what we do when we put our heads together, what we can figure out. Ask them questions, have them explain to you what they do understand. There's so much that parents can do even for older children, even if you don't know the math.
Oh, and just one more thing. Many students or come from they're immigrants. They come from different cultures where they may have learned different routines and algorithms. A wonderful activity is if you have an alternative algorithm, sharing that, and then having students think about, well, how is this the same or different than the algorithm you use? Is this easier? Is it better? Does it make more sense? Those kinds of things as well. Because oftentimes we teachers ignore those kinds of resources that parents have, and they never know if they don't ask a question, right? So
That's so true. Thank you. Okay, so to our first question, is there a difference between identity as a math person and identity as an African American male mathematician or Latina mathematician, etc.?
So,
Yeah.
one of the things that I have really tried to do in my work is to see how we can make those two identities overlap, the cultural identity with the mathematical identity. And so part of my work specifically with African American students is getting them to understand that mathematics is as much a part of African culture and African American culture as it is any other culture. And so we talk about the fact that the Ishango bone and the Lubombo bones are the oldest mathematical artifacts in the world that are from Africa. We talk about the Yoruba number system, which again is one of these. It's a cultural group in the current day country of Nigeria, and in their language, they have a number system that is base 20 that uses addition and subtraction, and that has numbers as large as 2 million, right? And so there's just a lot of really interesting number sense and patterns that you can understand by exploring that. We talk about the ancient Egyptian mathematics and all the different kinds of algorithms that they use, the different kinds of mathematical problems that we have records of because they kept records, right? And then also then talking about African American mathematicians. One of the biggest boons to that idea was the movie Hidden Figure, the book and the movie Hidden Figures, which really popularized unknown African American mathematicians. The same thing can be done with every distinct cultural group that you work with. It's going to take it's taken me a while to do that research and compile all that information, but the same kind of things can be done for all cultural groups that helps merge those two identities. So you don't have to feel like you can't be a math person if you're an African American, right? So no, those identities, there's nothing wrong with those identities being one and the same.
And we all have multiple identities. Unfortunately, one of the things I've said we're really good at doing as Americans is we know how to other people. And so because of stereotypes, we oftentimes think because of whatever identity we may identify, whether it's a female, whether it's an African American, or whether it's what part of the country I'm at, stereotypes influence our thinking about those identities. And one of the reasons I think it's so important for us to tell our math stories, have our students tell those math stories, because we're still writing them. We are still writing those math stories. And so we can choose to engage other people in a part of our math stories, and we can choose what we want to be. What do we want those math stories to be? So one of the things I've always prided myself is not allowing other people's stereotypes about me limit what I can do given any particular identity.
That was powerful. If I could go back, I wish I could have done that as well. Second question, how has this notion of quote unquote rehumanization of math been taken up in teacher ed programs, or has it even been taken up?
So, unfortunately, I was a faculty advisor in the teacher education program in Center X. And so I know that they took a very strong social justice stance. And so when the book Rethinking Math came out, I, along with my colleagues, we were teaching the math methods courses and the resident seminars. And so we incorporated those tasks into into the coursework, right? And we really encouraged teachers to engage their students in these tasks. So, this whole idea of rehumanizing math really came out of an annual Perspectives on Mathematics Education book by National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. Their 2018 yearbook was entitled Rehumanizing Mathematics for Black, Latinx, and Indigenous Students. And so it's a relatively new concept. So I don't know how teacher education programs have been taking the work up. I would be very surprised if my colleagues in the teacher education program in Center X were not referring, and this is a lot of the work of Rochelle Gutierrez and Imani Masters-Goffney. They were the editors of the book, but just a lot of forward-thinking people have chapters in that book. So again, I don't know to what extent. I know that we've been trying to use it a lot in our professional development offerings. So,
Yes, and I know that many people have told me that they are using our book in their teacher prep programs, in their graduate programs, as well as their undergraduate programs.
As they should. They really should. And the last question we have, how do people get you to come to their school and work with teachers? And yeah, I guess that's the question. How do we get you as a consultant?
Well, for me, the best way is to come to my website. You can find my email address there. There's a contact form. You can contact me that way, and I can give you my email address straight away. But yes, now that I'm a full-time consultant, I definitely do that.
So, and similarly, my email is the best way to contact me. I do still work full-time as the executive director of the California Math Project, so I don't have as much time as Pam does, but we can try to work it out, see what we can do.
Amazing. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Kyndall, so much for your time, your knowledge, your expertise. I know everyone needs to go buy this book, especially if you believe that you can't do math. This is the book that you need to get. Thank you. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Bye.